Hello and welcome back. This is MC1 Gamer, back from the dead. Finally built my PC and everything's been tested. The video, the audio, and I'll start putting up content again pretty soon. Various games, various opinions. Put up a recent video about an update on the hobby, what kind of things that I've been doing. But I saw a kind of a topic that's been going around with a lot of the YouTubers, and it relates to comp. So I figured I'd weigh in with one of my first videos back, certainly one of my first commentary videos back, and just let you know what my feeling is and add to that conversation. Now, comp has always been a sensitive subject for me. I go back, you can see from the gray, I go back a while when it comes to Warhammer. Took a big hiatus, break from the game for personal reasons. Got married, had a kid, bought a house, had responsibilities. Things are a little bit different now, and I have more time to engage in the hobby. My son's older and now is taking up even a little bit of an interest. But comp is something that has evolved over time. And I'm going to first give you my opinion about comp in general, and then I'll let you know what I think about comp as it pertains to the community. I'm not a real big fan of comp, but I recognize that it's needed, and there's certain elements and certain levels of comp that help improve the game and help improve the experience. And what I mean by that is that if you're in a competitive field, if you're in a competitive arena, you want to at least know that when you're going in, you're not going in with one hand tied behind your back. You want to know that there's at least some level of fairness, that so that if you're engaging in that competitive environment, that especially if there's prizes that are involved, that you have a reasonable chance that you're not already set at a disadvantage. And forget about the campaign issues or the casual type game for a minute. In that type of a situation, there are scenarios where you're inherently at a disadvantage because of the goals, because of the story. But let's just talk about competitively. In a competitive environment, comp is in some degree is necessary in Warhammer. Because Warhammer is not a complete game. It's not a finished game for the competitive circuit. And I want to explain that a little bit more. And it really lends to what my feeling is on why I don't like lots of comp. But when I say lots of comp, I mean there are certain things that break the game, that make it impossible to enjoy. I don't like, for instance, the folding fortress. I think it hurts the game. It's a detractor. And there are certain other elements too. I don't particularly like the 8th edition shooting rules. But in the competitive scene in Warhammer, and I'm specifically talking about fantasy, and I'm sure that a lot of this carries over to 40K, but I haven't played 40K in probably almost 2 decades. So the idea that you're going into a competitive and into a tournament, into a competitive scene, and there are certain things that are just going to that are completely unbalanced about certain army books. This has been discussed, and this will continue to be discussed, I'm sure, with a lot of these videos. I've already seen Vince's video, for example, Vince Vitrilla, and he already pointed out a couple things. I don't want to retread on some of the stuff that he's already gone over, and hopefully not duplicating things that other people are also discussing. But obviously, you want to have an even or a reasonably level playing field, and the game inherently is not balanced, and it's not supposed to be balanced. So let me jump to that part of my opinion. Warhammer is a beer and pretzels type game, and one of the reasons why GW basically walked away from the whole competitive scene is because it was too hard to keep up with that, and they just didn't want to make that kind of game, and it got taken over by the community, by local stores, and now there's all kinds of regional, national, and international events. But GW doesn't want to have anything to do with that. They've made it pretty evident that they want to play, they want to make models, and they'll create a rule set as an add-on, and that's it. And then you do what you wish. They really have no care for the competitive scene. And the competitive scene apparently makes up a vast minority of the overall Warhammer player base. The customer base, the people. You could have somebody walks in the store one time and buys one box and one book and never buys anything else. They're considered part of the player base. That stuff could sit on a shelf and never be used. They're still part of the consumer base. Apparently, the overall spectrum of buyers of Warhammer products, the competitive scene is not a very large portion. We're a vocal minority, and I consider myself part of it because I do occasionally engage in tournaments. I'm not a diehard. I'm not absolutely overly obsessed with it, and sometimes I like to step back from it and not be involved because I think it creates a certain mindset. That very competitive mindset can actually detract from the fun of the game for both you and your opponent in certain circumstances. And the reason for that is because you're really trying to put a square peg in a round hole. And that's because the game isn't designed as such. You look at other game systems that have the competitive nature, and sometimes they tweak it, and sometimes there are comp that is applied. But a lot of games don't need comp, and that's because the game is built for that competitive environment, or it's QA'd enough, it's tested enough that it's reasonably balanced, or it's a living game. And what I mean by a living game is it's constantly evolving. New rules are being introduced. The player base, the customer base knows this. They accept that the game is going to get changed. They accept that new cards are going to come into play, new factions are going to come into play, new units are going to come into play. Take a look at Fantasy Flight. That is a living game. It's an eternally changing game. You buy into that game with the starter set and for initial waves, and every wave changes it. Every wave can completely change the previous one, and after 5 or 6 or 7 waves of the initial X-Wing game, there's new factions that are being introduced, new cards that are even changing some of the ships that were introduced in the very first wave, and that's part of the fun of that game. If that's what you enjoy, that constant collectivity, that continuous evolution, you're going to love a game like that. When you have a situation like with Warhammer, the evolution of the game changes very slowly. The introduction of new army books, the introduction of new editions, the introduction of new units, up until now, up until 8th, that hasn't happened. So if there's imbalances, and there are going to be in a very complex, very diverse game with so many different pieces on the board and so many different rules, there's going to be some imbalances. It's not going to be tested. It probably is a nightmare to have to test something like that to ensure some reasonable level of balance. And that's probably why GW tossed that whole situation out. We may see a difference with that at 9th. That's one of the rumors. It may become more of a living game where a box is released that could apply to one or more factions, and with its own rule sets, where it doesn't need to have a new army book introduced continuously, where the game is going to be inherently imbalanced. And you're going to find in the competitive scene, if that is the case, that there's going to be the list of the month. There's going to be the unit structure of the month. There's going to be imbalances that are going to be corrected with new things that are going to be introduced. But it's going to be understood that this is the way it's going. Just like when you go to some of these other tournaments with these other games that are constantly evolving. It just is what it is. There's going to be broken things that are going to be introduced, and you're going to have to accept that when you go and enter into the competitive scene. My feeling is because the game, Warhammer specifically was created to be this beer and pretzels type game. If you don't understand what that means, it means it's a game where a bunch of friends get together. Doesn't have to be all dudes, and that's a shout out to the 4% females that apparently are watching my videos. Hope to grow that, and thank you very much for all of you who are watchers. But I'm very impressed that there are some ladies that actually watch this channel too, that are into the hobby in general. So I don't see it very much locally, but it's nice to know that is a segment of the population. And in any case, that is, if you're the idea that this is a game that you get together with a bunch of friends, maybe over with some drinks on the side and some snacks, and you just play the game and you laugh at how ludicrous some things are. You look at some of the factions like Orcs and Goblins and Skaven, and some of the things that happen are hysterical. You should be able to laugh when your cannon explodes, when something goes out of control, when your caster, even if it's your general, gets sucked into the warp. Being basically a Vampire Counts player, I should be able to crack up and just laugh with tears in my eyes for multiple reasons, when my entire army crumbles to dust because my general just got sucked into the war, this incredibly expensive, massively powerful character. And I don't want to get too deeply into the casual versus competitive player base, but we were really trying to adjust a game that was meant for a different style of play to fit the style of play that a certain segment of the customer base wants. And I've bought into that, and I'm part of that, and I enjoy that aspect. But I think we really need to understand that it's not an easy thing to do, and all of the different systems, they're not all balanced and they're not all fair. Take a look at Swedish Comp, for example, where dwarves are basically ruling the roost right now. And it kind of makes me wish that I kept my dwarves when I sold all of them, just because I didn't know where Eighth was going to go, and I didn't want to have another add-on army that may be voided out when the new edition comes into play. And I'm sure that I'll regret that decision and I'll go buy some more dwarves. But even so, I don't play Swedish Comp. I think I've seen one Swedish Comp-oriented tournament in my local area. And since I returned to the hobby a couple years ago, and I just don't think that that the idea of having to comp a game just for the competitive scene is necessarily a reflection of how good that system is. I mean, I love the Warhammer Fantasy game system, and it's been widely accepted that 8th edition is one of the most balanced, if not the most balanced, to date. But the idea that it has to be comped to create a balanced play system, and there are multiple systems that do it in different ways, and even those are not always agreed upon by everybody in the customer base. You just adhere to it, because if you want to join into a tournament and that's the rule set that they give you, well, then you're going to have to go and accept that rule set and buy into it and build according to those rules. But if you want to be involved in that competitive scene, comp is just going to be a reality. It's just a difficult thing, and I think it takes away from the fun of the game in some respects. If competition is what you enjoy, then you're going to have a level of frustration because you're always going to be battling with that change in balance, that differing opinion of balance. When I join in on games and with some tournaments with X-Wing or with some other competitive games that I've played, there's very little argument about the need for comp, and even though there is some comp that I've seen introduced, for instance, with X-Wing, I'm using that as just one example, but I think it's one of the most rounded, most balanced games, even though it continuously evolves and there are things that are more powerful than others. I think it's a good example because you don't have a lot of need for comp. There's been some subtle need, for instance, with things, the TIE Swarm early on was just incredibly imbalanced. It was overly powerful. And there were a lot of effort to try and adjust to compete with that. And new cards, new ships, new factions have changed that. It actually, it has changed it for the better, because there's ways to overcome that. But you look at Warhammer, and there are certain armies that seem to always be at the top of the heap. There's certain units that seem to always be, if not unkillable, just incredibly good for their points. It's a never-ending battle. So where you go is going to make things different. You're not going to have the same type of a tournament on the Northeast versus the West Coast versus over in Europe, for example. They're going to have different systems, and there's going to be different styles of play. You're not playing from basically the same rule set. Comp is adjusting the level of power based on somebody's opinion. It could be a council of people. It could be a fleet of people that are veteran players that have incredible knowledge and have thousands of hours of play time in. Doesn't matter. It's still changing the rules to another level of imbalance. Now, it's needed. There's certain aspects of the game, I think, that are weak and haven't been tested and are just apt for abuse. They're not even clear. Look at all the issues with FAQs and not understanding the rules as written versus rules as intended. You need to have a standard in a competitive environment so that everybody feels like, like if they're investing the time and money and to compete, that they're not doing it again with blindfolded or with one leg tied to the other. The idea that this game was meant for casual play, and then it's been adjusted and twisted and contorted to fit a competitive environment, means that it's just not going to be an easy thing to do. And I don't know if that's necessarily something that we're going to see as much in Ninth. I think it might be a dated thing for Warhammer, and it might be indicative of the kind of changes they're looking to bring to Ninth Edition. I kind of hope. You know, it would be nice. There are detractions to that. I'm not sure if I like the idea that it's going to be a collectability environment where if you don't get a certain box set that it might go away and you might not come and never come back. But I do like the idea that if you do buy that, it comes with its own rules, and you may not have to wait for a new army book for you to be able to be competitive, whether it's casual or in tournament play, for another 5 or 10 years. There can be things that are introduced that could completely change the game immediately, and that could be a great strength. We'll have to wait and see on all that stuff. There's still a lot of speculation about Ninth. But the idea of comp is adjusting a game that may not be finished yet, or may not be what you think it is, or what you want it to be. If you're just playing for the casual game, if you're playing just to enjoy the game with some friends and laugh at the ludicrousness and the ridiculousness of some of the random crazy results that can occur, then you're going to be less frustrated, and you're going to be a happier player, and you're going to have probably more fun. But if you want to even occasionally get into the competitive circuit, you're going to have to accept the fact that comp is a reality. I have, and my feeling about comp is I would like less of it. I don't like these, ridiculous statistical charts that you have to get into with things like Swedish. I can accept some of the things about ETC, but if you want to play what you buy, and you don't want to have to now buy stuff to accommodate the lists that need to be competitive in a competitive environment, then you're going to be you need to stay out of that competitive scene. If you want to engage in that, you're going to need to change your purchase practices, and you're going to need to adjust so that you can compete, and that's a different game. It's a completely different game. So as long as you're accepting that that fact, as long as you're willing to join in with that rationale, then you're going to have fun. You're going to have fun, and you're going to enjoy yourself. But I see plenty of players that love playing Warhammer that just get frustrated and flipped out and rage. And I'm not just talking about some of the usual suspects. I'm talking in general. I wonder if they're enjoying the game sometimes, because the system sometimes is not favoring certain armies that they love, and that can change over time. But it just is because the balance that's created is based off of an imbalanced game, and it's not always going to be fair, and it's not always going to be what everybody agrees upon. So that's my feeling about comp. Sure, I can go on and ramble about it, but wanted to put my 2 cents in and join in the conversation. I'm looking to do more of this stuff, and I'm looking to read and watch what everybody else's opinions are. So hey, have a great day, everybody.